Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin. My name is Todd Pruitt, and I'm the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And today, it's a little bit different because I am not joined by my friend and co-host, Carl Trueman, who could not be with us today. But given the topic, I think his whole English attitude would be nothing but a distraction. And so we're going to fly solo here with our guest. And our guest is John Wilsey. John is a professor of church history, and he's the chair of the Department of Church History and Historical Theology at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, an institution that no doubt most of our listeners are familiar with. Wonderful faculty there, wonderful history, and they continue to do great work. John, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Todd. I really am honored to be with you.
Well, we're having you on because you've written a really interesting, I think very helpful book, and for some, at least, will be controversial because of what you affirm, which is historically what conservative Christians have affirmed in the history of our country, but is now kind of being challenged in some of my circles in the Presbyterian world, and I know also in certain corners of the Baptist world as well. The book I'm speaking of is entitled Religious Freedom, a Conservative Primer, and it is published by Eerdmans, and I want to commend it, first of all, to our readers. It is very thoughtful, it's well-researched, and it is I guess I could describe it as a defense of the disestablishment clause. Would that be a good way to put that, John?
It is, among other things.
Among
it is
other things, certainly.
A defense of the disestablishment clause. It's a defense of the unique tradition of religious freedom that's prevailed in the United States since the enactment of the Constitution.
Right.
It's also a defense of the American political and cultural order.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book about conservatism. It's a book about religious freedom.
Yeah.
And it's a book about America. It's a book that embraces an ordered love of country, which I think we also need.
Right. Now, you write about America's two spirits. Explain that to our listeners.
I get that. Yes, that's the rubric I'm working with in the book, America's Two Spirits, and I get that. I get that concept from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Who
you, I think, appropriately so and very helpfully so, quote from quite a bit, as so many American historians do, in order to understand kind of what the spirit of our founding was about. And it's so helpfully described by Tocqueville as an outsider, coming from a distinctively different type of revolutionary spirit, the French Revolution, and the things that he admired about our country. So anyway, this idea of the two spirits of America.
Yeah. And if I may read a quote from Tocqueville, and this is where the book really gets going. He said in Volume 1 of Democracy in America, Anglo-American civilization is the product of two perfectly distinct elements that elsewhere are often at odds. Mm-hmm. But in America, these two have been successfully blended in a way and marvelously combined. I mean, the spirit of religion and the spirit of liberty. The American traditional conception of the relationship between church and state is reflected in that harmony that Tocqueville observed when he came to America between 1831 and 1832. And it was a contrast for him because in his native France, the spirits of religion and liberty were at odds with one another. They were at war with one another. And that's one of the reasons why he wrote his book, was because he wanted to see a country that was a republic, that had a revolution and yet had political stability,
right,
and did not suffer the chaos and then the subsequent tyranny that they'd suffered in France. And he believed that that the two spirits of religion and freedom were being in harmony with one another were one of the explanations for that stability.
Yeah, it's a strange contrast, because with the American Revolution, you had a revolution that didn't subsist on the slaughter of its own citizens, which Tocqueville, no doubt, was very piqued by in terms of his curiosity. And
yes.
would you say, it seems like Tocqueville probably said, would you say that it was the uniquely religious, and from there, uniquely even Christian character, even in a more general sense? We know that not all of the founders were, quote, evangelicals, but they certainly operated out of a basically Christian worldview in terms of its major contours. Was that the main thing that was missing in the French Revolution that made the difference, would you say?
Don't know that I would say it quite that boldly, but I would say that it was very prominent, very prominent.
Yeah.
Tocqueville says in volume 1, early in the book, that the first American was the first Puritan that landed on shores.
Yeah.
And he credits the Puritans with the American tradition of liberty, which he defines as roughly as active citizenship that is a moral citizenship. It's a moral category because it's defined by just law, and it's also seen and applied through the active participation of citizens in a locality as they conceive of themselves as being stakeholders in their community, in their society. So, but back to your original question, yes, certainly the Tocqueville says this in in his book Old Regime and the French Revolution, which is his book on the French Revolution, that the great failure of one of the great failures of the revolution was that the revolutionaries threw off all tradition, and in doing that, then they were forced to begin whole cloth. And when they did that, and they ignored tradition, that's when their project was really doomed to futility. And in America, you rightly point out that that's not what we did. And in many ways, certainly someone like John Adams, even to a certain extent, Thomas Jefferson, saw the revolution less as a revolution and more of a restoration.
Right.
I do think you could say that what happened in America between 1775, Lexington and Concord, until 1791, which would be the 10 amendments being added to the Constitution. You could say that there was restorational features of those events and revolutionary features of those events. I think to call it an American Revolution is not a wrong thing, but sometimes restoration gets lost in that, because it is a calling upon of tradition, not a throwing out of tradition like in France.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What is it about Christianity that tends to cohere well with this notion of liberty? Is there, because we can go to because America still is a religious society. We talk a lot about the nuns and the deconstructors, but the fact is, religion is still popular in the United States, and in fact, we're beginning to see a resurgence of church going, particularly among younger men in the United States. So religion isn't going away. anytime soon.
Thank God.
Yeah, exactly. But you go to certain other parts of the world that are very religious, and they don't cohere well within the idea of liberty, and certain features of liberal democracy. What is it about Christianity that seemed to fit so well with these notions of liberty?
Yeah, Todd, you're asking some big questions. We only have a half an hour, but I'll start. We can start the conversation
Yeah,
by looking at theological anthropology. It's that we see in the scriptures.
right.
I make the argument in the book that human nature can be, when we read in the Bible, that the Bible shows us that human nature is in a tension. On the one hand, think Psalm 8, think Genesis 1, 26, 27. We are created in the image of God. We are created a little lower than the angels, if you get that out of King James. And for that reason, we possess unspeakable, profound dignity. And we also possess, as contingent beings can, we possess freedom. And with freedom comes responsibility. But that dignity also rests alongside of our fallenness, our depravity. And so, think Isaiah 59, think think Romans 3, Romans 6. We are depraved. Every aspect of our being is depraved, touched by sin. We are born into sin. We are responsible for our own individual sins, and we're condemned to death because of our sin. So that tension is what we find in human nature, and the tension that we see in human nature, theologically speaking, and in a transcendent sense, is resolved in the atonement of the Lord Jesus and his defeat of sin and the grave. But in an immanent sense, the tension is resolved in freedom under law, ordered liberty.
Yeah.
In the American constitutional tradition, there was a recognition, especially among someone like James Madison, that's all over the Federalist Papers. His most famous, his famous ones, Federalist 10, Federalist 51, especially, acknowledging that tension, acknowledging that human beings are in need of being checked, because human beings seek power above all things and want to concentrate power, and seek to enrich themselves at others' expense in a political society. And just law checks that impulse, so that the conditions are set by the state through civil law for individual citizens to cultivate their gifts, their talents, to acquire property for their own flourishing and their own enrichment as they decide to dispose of their property, for example, their intellectual property and their physical property. So that's how we can get the conversation going in terms of what the contribution of Christianity is to freedom.
Right. And the reason why I like to explore that a bit is because, as we were talking earlier, in my corner of the doctrinal ecclesiological world, we have some voices within the Reformed Church, Presbyterians, that we need to return to a European-style state church, that the rule of the civil magistrate goes hand in hand with ecclesiastical authority. And I've heard a few Baptist voices saying that as well, and even some of them openly saying, you know what, we need to rethink this whole constitutional form of government that we have here, and find ourselves a Christian prince who will rule. Now, one of the things that's so confounding about that is that they seem to operate in the realm of theory, but seem to also not be anchored in historical data at all, as though that's worked really well for Christian faithfulness in the past. But my question related to that is, why do we want religious liberty? Why do we not want an established church? Why should Christians who are interested in orthodox, sound, biblical Christianity, a Great Commission Christianity that's interested in evangelizing and winning the lost to Christ and obeying all that Christ has said, why do we also say it's not a good idea to have an established church?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Experience over the past 200 years plus has taught us this, that disestablishment is a benefit to society. It is the key to the success of the mission of the church as the church seeks to fulfill the greatest commandments and to fulfill the Great Commission. Disestablishment is the best way forward for that. It was obvious as early as 1831 when Tocqueville came here. When Tocqueville came here, he was surprised to see religion flourishing so deeply in American culture because it was a disestablished culture. He didn't expect to find in a republic that had a disestablished church. It was a surprise to him to see that Christianity was flourishing, was growing, was deepening, even among Catholics, which he thought was crazy. He thought that, he, like other Europeans, believed that an established church was necessary for you to have an ordered society, and even an ordered free society. But he came to America. He found that Americans were doing just fine without one. In fact, they were doing far better than they were in Europe, and that was obvious within 50 years of the success of the revolution. And we have another 100, almost 200 years to look back on to see the flourishing of, for example, missions organizations, the flourishing of people in the faith over the past 2 centuries, the contribution of Christianity to the mores of the culture, even in our culture now. Our culture now, we can all agree. Everybody on both sides of this, on the right, can agree that the culture has become more and more secular over the years, and we have a crazy culture with regard to gender confusion and on. Just go on down the list: abortion, same-sex marriage, and all that. Yeah. But even with all that, as you just indicated a second ago, the Christian faith is not in any sense diminished or threatened or thwarted in its efforts to convert the society that we live in and to reach out and to seek the conversion of the nations. Not at all. Getting back to your question, why do we need religious freedom? Why do we need disestablishment and not an established church? The short answer I can give to you is prescription. What Russell Kirk described as prescription. The long experience of religious freedom in America, we've got 2.5 centuries of it, has demonstrated to us that this is a good that is protected by the government, that the citizens enjoy, and that the churches have thrived under. And that's not something that we want to dismiss lightly. It's not something that we want to throw away in some kind of abstract utopian ideal arrangement. That's how the left operates. We don't need to be taking our cues from Marxist revolutionaries in terms of how to move forward with a model for society.
And it's as though we're unaware of how an established church has worked out in a lot of other European nations. It doesn't have a great track record, and so I'm oftentimes dismayed by those who say, it hasn't worked elsewhere, but it might work here. It's extraordinary to me.
It is.
So, and let's also kind of what we're not saying, those of us who like to not have an established church, we are not saying Christians don't be involved in the public square. We love Christians being involved in the public square. Christians run for for school board, run for city council, run for office nationwide and local. We love that. We want that. We want Christians in the church to have an active influence in society, but we just believe that works a lot better in the end as a voluntary notion rather than something that would be coerced by some sort of partnership between an established church and a Christian.
Totally.
I mean, Carl, I joked about Carl not being here, but Carl's made a great observation, is that, we can't even, in terms of, are we getting, are we going to have a Christian nationalist finally, can we really make this happen? And Carl's made the statement, we can't even get an Orthodox Protestant on the Supreme Court. We're nowhere near becoming this kind of nation led by a Christian prince with an established church.
Sure.
It's not even on the radar, but we would go further and say, and that's okay, because the track record of an established church and a formal relationship between a so-called Christian prince and the church, that just doesn't work out well for the church, nor does it work out well for the people. And we ought to, as Christians, we're supposed to care about that kind of thing.
That's right. That's right. In the book, I cite a lot of Rodney Stark's work.
Yes.
In his documentation of that dynamic that you just put your finger on, that established churches that are in Europe are the central hubs of secularism.
Right.
And by comparison, America is more religious than an England or a France or the Scandinavia countries and so forth.
Yeah, those established churches have simply become chaplains for the secularization of the society itself.
That's a good
and
way
I don't know
to
how
put
you
it.
avoid that. Yeah, I just don't know how you avoid that. One last thought. You make a good point in delving into what conservatism actually is versus what it's not. We have voices today that are pressing for some sort of a Christian nationalist vision. Right now we have men like Tucker Carlson, who's being called a conservative, but men like Russell Kirk might not recognize Tucker Carlson's kind of conservatism or Candace Owens' kind of as actual conservatism. How does historic American conservatism, as embodied so well by men like Russell Kirk, how does that differentiate between some of these new kind of edgelord, angry brands of conservatism that we're seeing rise up among kind of the angry young man set right now? What are some of the primary differences that you would see there?
If I may read just a small quote from the book.
Yeah.
This is the definition that Peter Viereck, who I cite a lot in the book, how he defined conservatism. He said the conservative principles par excellence are proportion and measure, self-expression through self-restraint, a preservation through reform, humanism and classical balance, a fruitful nostalgia for the permanent beneath the flux, and a fruitful obsession for unbroken historical continuity. These principles create liberty, a liberty built not on the quicksand of adolescent defiance, but on the bedrock of ethics and law.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed about, on the what Peter Viereck called the Autentatist right, which I love his description of that. What I notice is that they are a movement. It is a movement marked by grievance.
Yes.
And I'm scratching my head wondering what other movement is also predicated upon grievance.
Exactly.
It's the leftist. The leftists, all they have is grievance.
Right.
And it seems that the populist right only has grievance. They're just mad all the time. And if we follow Peter Viereck's definition of conservatism, if we look at Russell Kirk's 6 canons of conservatism, if we even look at William F. Buckley and his conservatism and his application of conservative ideas and his career, what do we see? We see gratitude. We see a joie de vivre, joy of living, cheerfulness. Recognizing that in our own generation we may not even see an ordered society that we want to see. But that's not the point.
Right.
The point is we are working for these things for our children and for our grandchildren and for their benefit, just like Hebrews 11. The men of God didn't see the promises that God made to them. They didn't see it with their own eyes, but they believed. And that kind of a faith is enlivening, it's animating, and as I try to say in the book, it's aspirational. And there's nothing aspirational about the populist right, and there's nothing aspirational about the leftists on the crazy lunatic fringe.
Right.
Nothing.
And that's why I found James Lindsay's taxonomy of woke right to be quite accurate.
Yes.
Because he identified those very same things that characterized the left: grievance, anger, cynicism, as characterizing some of these new voices on the right. And Lindsay's right in saying that's not actually conservatism. That's just a different face of leftism, just with some different window dressing on it.
Yeah. But they're the same methodology, and it's very disconcerting to see that.
Yeah,
So.
I've challenged people to think about when you hear people talk about Christian nationalism, and there are some people that will call you a Christian nationalist if you believe that if you believe that we shouldn't be performing abortionists. You're a Christian Christian. Okay, so I'm talking about those prominent voices that want to do away with the disestablishment clause, et cetera, that kind of Christian nationalism. What seems to often be the case is that they whisper Christian and shout nationalism. And one of the things that we hope to be able to do when we think about what we want for our nation, what we want for our neighbor, is that the emphasis, the accent will be on the Christian part.
Absolutely.
We believe that patriotism is a good thing. It's a virtue. We ought to love where we're from. We ought to love our home and want to labor for its good. All of those things are Christian virtues. They find themselves fully in coherence with Christian faith, but the accent ought to be on the Christian. And if what I'm advocating for, like forced coercion of religious faith, that just doesn't cohere with Christianity at all.
No. I think that's very well stated. I've often said that a conservative, and this is not necessarily true just of conservatives, but for a conservative, it's certainly part and parcel of the way we see reality. That gratitude is the basis for our whole worldview.
Yes,
because we believe that as Christian conservatives, we believe that God is the ground of all being, and He's the giver of every good and perfect gift. And our families are a gift. Our country is a gift. These things aren't perfect. My family, they're great. I love them. I think they're the best, but they are not perfect. And I am not perfect.
Yeah.
But we are on the path of improvement as we are sanctified and established in Christ. And that's where the hope lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Well, our guest has been Professor John Wilsey of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and his book is Religious Freedom, a Conservative Primer, and I want to encourage our listeners to get a copy. These are discussions that are going on, and pastors, these are discussions that a lot of young men are having because they're being influenced by not the most helpful voices out there. And men like Wilsey are reminding us of our history, what has made us unique as Americans, what has helped the church to flourish, what has helped missions to flourish, what has helped our public witness to actually flourish versus what just might kill it if we don't preserve those things. And so I would encourage you to get this book. If you've got young men that are really interested in this subject, as I guarantee you do, this is one of the great books to put in their hands. Talk with them about it. Get a small group together and work through some of these things. Get a small group of young people, young college students in your church, young 20-somethings, and work through a book like this and explore why our tradition in America has been a good thing and a blessing from the Lord. And so, John, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah,
we really
thanks
appreciate
for having
the conversation.
Me.
You bet. And
great.
It's a fascinating subject, but it also just happens to be a really vital subject at this time in our life as a nation, and particularly in our corner of the world among conservative Christians.
Yeah, definitely.
This is an important topic. Well, to our listeners, I would say go to our website, mortificationofspin.org, and you can enter to win a copy of Professor Wilsey's book, Religious Freedom. And while you're there, if you'd like to make a contribution to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, you can do that as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will look forward to being with you next time on Mortification of Spin.
Sing along, yeah. Sing along to my freedom song. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.